The Nei Jing Tu is a classical chart from Taoism that has influenced most of the alchemical traditions. Within the chart is contained pretty much the entire process for alchemy, and it contains a map of the human body as it's viewed according to esoteric teachings. Nei Jing Tu means the classical chart of the internals of the body. Sometimes they call it the chart of the internal universe. But essentially what they're referring to is here are a series of teachings on how you may develop the insides of the body. The early stages of practice shown within the Nei Jing Tu, they correspond with the Nei Gong teachings, so activation of the lower dantian and development of the qi and the kidney fire within the body. It also then shows the conversion of the fluids, the reversal of the water within the body, right the way through the microcosmic orbit process, the Shao Jiutian, and then it contains the final stages of alchemical training, which is the development of the alchemical pill. For those people who are able to understand the meaning of the chart, there's a huge amount of teachings contained within it. Almost all northern sect practitioners, so most Chuanjian, Longmenpai practitioners, spend a great deal of time studying the Nei Jing Tu, and most sincere alchemy students will either be familiar with the chart or they'll have a copy of it within their practice space. So it's very, very influential and yet often misunderstood a little bit. It's an interesting chart because as well as showing the inside of the human body and all of the various energetic components contained within it, it also shows some of the meeting points between Buddhism and Taoism as well. And sometimes people don't know that especially because it's from within the northern Taoist traditions, it contains a huge amount of Buddhist teachings, even having some of the inscriptions on it are written supposedly by the Maitreya Buddha as well. So we'll see that when we go through the chart and explore a little bit how did the Buddhist teachings influence the teachings contained within the diagram. Within the Qing dynasty, the chart was passed on essentially as a silk scroll that was probably passed on from temple to temple. So probably all of the major Taoist temples that practiced alchemy would have had a copy of it. But in 1886, it was inscribed, it was carved into the wall of the Baiyonggan, the White Cloud Temple in Beijing. And this is the version most people know. Most people will be familiar with the carving. So most of the scrolls that you see today of the Nei Jing Tu are either directly, like direct rubbings of the carving, or else they're copied from the carving that you find in Beijing. It's a very impressive chart. If you ever go to Beijing, to White Cloud Temple, it's quite big, and it's carved into the wall just inside the main courtyard when you go into the temple. It's very, very beautiful. So the scrolls that people get these days probably been adjusted over time, because probably nothing is going to last all the way from the Qing dynasty, or probably before, because it's based on teachings that came earlier than that. They're always going to be adjusted a little bit. But even though there'll be some small errors or small changes that happened over the generations, the basis of the teachings are still there. The chart, like I said, is a diagram of the human body. It's divided into 3 sections. The lower section basically shows from the diaphragm down, shows from the diaphragm right down to the base of the body, down to the base of the perineum. Above what is actually a cliff face on the chart, above the diaphragm, it shows the region of the chest, and then the upper part of the diagram shows the head. So it's depicted as a kind of esoteric mountain, with the head being at the mountain peak and the perineum being at the base of the body. A lot of the time you'll see a lot of Taoist charts will do this, a lot of alchemical charts, is they try to copy the body as a mountain or sometimes a temple or something within the environment. And this was alluding to the Taoist idea of the macrocosm and the microcosm reflecting one another. Remember, the basis for many of the Taoist teachings was to establish the cycles within the body so that they copied or they were in sync with the cycles of the outer universe. So they liked to depict things like this. Some people don't realize actually, but a lot of the Chinese brush paintings that you see, especially the older ones that show sort of mountain scenes and pine forests and rivers and things like this, and oftentimes people just think they're sort of beautiful scenes. But if you ever look at old brush paintings, they're often very similar. There's a very similar theme. Everybody always wanted to paint mountains and pine trees and rivers and lakes, and you can look at a lot of Chinese paintings and all very similar. And part of the reason for that was because they were also depicting the alchemical process that was taking place. So a lot of the sort of these ideas that we see in the Nei Jing Tu permeated through all of Chinese art. And that's why, like I say, you get these sort of same iconographic images appearing within their artwork. So the Nei Jing Tu has these 3 sections that show the different regions of the body and all sorts of esoteric symbology contained within the image. And on top of that, it also has a poem attached to it as well, a large block of text that kind of gives an overview of the Nei Jing Tu, but also the alchemy process, if you can understand the metaphorical language contained within it. And that's what I'll try and explain to you. But first of all, let's have a little bit of a look at the chart itself. Before we look at the Chinese writings or the teachings in it, we need to understand a little bit about what each of the parts of the diagram show. So what I'll do is I'll begin at the bottom of the diagram, right at the base where you've got that big lake, all these nice waves rolling around, and I'll work my way up as if we're climbing up the mountain, and we'll see what all these little things are. So at the base of the body, like I say, you've got the lake, you've got the waves of the water. And what this is showing is the seat of the water that we're trying to reverse within our chemical practices. So this represents the element of water. Within the I Ching, it's the trigram of Kan, the water gua, if you're into your I Ching theory. And it's the kidney water. So the essence and the Jing, the blueprints of who we are, are said to sit like a still lake at the base of the body. But as you can see within the chart, the water is far from still. There's waves, and it looks like it's a storm or something, like it's very, very active down there. And what it's showing is the water needs to stir into action through our processes in order to flow up the mountain. Because if you look at the direction of the water that's going up, it's climbing the mountain, it's reversing the water course. Because as you would imagine, water generally flows downwards, right, under the action of gravity. But in this chart, we're sending it up. So it's climbing up the spine on the right-hand side of the chart towards the head. So this is the kidney water down the base of the body. This is the reserve from which we draw all of our power. It's quite nice in the colored version of the chart as well that there's a red glow coming off of the water, which in some of the black and white charts, but not all, there's different versions of it, you'll see like sort of straight lines drawing to show the water is glowing. And what this is the balance of fire and water, or the yang being extracted from the yin. Within our chemical esoteric teachings, this is the Jinghua, the seed of pure yang that sits within the essence that's being extracted. So the water is being, as they say within our chemical teachings, cooked. So it turns into steam, and this is what establishes the rising of the water up through the spine of the body. But as we go deeper into the chart, we'll look at what this actually means. Above this, we have 2 farmers sat on some wheels. On some water wheels, and you can see that they look like they're riding upon it, but they're said to be pedaling it, turning it. So the idea is that farmers are used to represent toil, or the idea of working hard or putting a lot of effort into what you're doing. Now, if you think about ancient China and all the different types of people that would have lived in that land, we could probably, it's fairly safe to say some of the hardest workers would have been the farm people, trying to toil on the land and producing enough grain to feed what is essentially a very large country with a lot of people in it. So often they use farm people to represent work or toil or the amount of effort that needs to be put in. The turning of the wheel represents different things. So firstly, the turning of the wheel represents effort, to roll and rotate, to create the reactions we want. The second meaning of the wheel is essentially that as it starts to rotate, this is the turning of the water. So they say that when the wheel is rotating, that the water starts to move, the course starts to reverse. The idea being that the water turning is the cycle within our body that matches the cycle of the environment. So this is this microcosmic and macrocosmic connection that we see over and over within Taoism. The third meaning of the wheel is actually the dantian. So this elixir field that sits at the base of the body, once it gets to a certain amount of development, a certain degree of energetic consolidation, it actually starts to turn. And the water wheel within the base of the body is the rotation of the dantian that serves as a driving force for the water, or the Jing that converts up through our spine. And again, we'll look at that a little bit when we go deeper into the chart, because there's 2 different representations of that process within the diagram. The fourth and final meaning of the wheel is the influence of Buddhism, because the wheel represents 2 things. One, the samsaric cycle of rebirth. So they wanted to show that essentially if you were able to toil hard enough and understand this process, then you would be mastering the process of reincarnation. So you would be escaping the cycle of samsara, the deluded state that leads to the rebirth of the soul over and over again. And you'll see when we look at the poetry and the Chinese writing that surround the text, reincarnation and freedom from rebirth are discussed a few times, which is definitely more of a Buddhist idea. So this concept has been put into the chart. The Taoist idea is more to do with immortality, and you'll see both writings contained within the teachings here. The second meaning of the wheel also represents the turning or the production or the teachings of the Dharma as well. So we basically have a representation of the body of many things, okay? And the Dharma teachings are another thing that is alluded to here within the chart. To the right of the wheels that are being worked on the bottom of the body near the perineum is a temple with water gushing out of it. This temple represents essentially the entry point of the water into the spine. So you can see there's an archway through which the water is passing, and this is known as the gate of the governor channel. This essentially corresponds with Wei Lu, which is the tailbone or the coccyx, and it's the point through which the perineum draws the water so that it enters into the spine. So this temple represents that first pass. And if you travel up the spine, if you follow that line, you'll see there's a few other temples along the way. And these represent the clipping passes, or the doorways through which the chi must pass in the spine. These are points where the chi can get stuck within the microcosmic orbit practice, and they're represented by these doorways. Usually within Chinese terminologies, if you have a doorway, a gateway, then it means that things can convert and transform as they pass through it as well. And these gateways correspond with each of the major regions of the body through which the energy is refined as it passes up through the cycle. So continuing above this, we have some fire. We have the fire underneath four Taiji symbols, four yin-yang symbols. And as you can see, the four yin-yang symbols are turning, they are rotating, and surrounding them are like a warm glow, a red glow. So the lower fire, the fire that's underneath the yin-yang symbols, represents the furnace, okay, what they call the Lu. This is the warmth that arises at the region of the perineum. See, it's near the base of the spine. And this arises when the Jing starts to convert. When the Jing Hua, the yang essence, is extracted from the Jing. It is like a cooker that steams the water. It's like you're applying warmth to soup to get it to come to the boil or something. And this is what's represented at the base of the body. The four yin-yang symbols, or Taiji symbols, whatever you wish to call them, they're essentially referring to a few things. One is the idea that once again this wheel must rotate to create warmth, and this is why they're glowing. As soon as the Jing starts to cook the qi and enough energy moves into the dantian region, and this is what this represents, right? The dantian, the elixir field, it's still talking about this area of the body. Then what happens is yin and yang start to convert. They start to change. So the rotation of yin and yang is the mixing of yin and yang qi within the lower dantian region. And this produces warmth because like electricity moving into an area of resistance, it starts to produce a heat. And this is the cooking of the qi of the dantian that is so important within the alchemical process. The other reason they choose 4 is because 4 numerologically represents form. So by using number 4, they're implying that the dantian starts to develop a solidified or consolidated form within the lower abdomen. So at the base of the body, we have the wheels being turned by the farm people, right? And we have 3 of them. 3 represents a yang number and the potential for something. So this is the action of cultivation. But a little further up, the dantian has now converted to the number 4, so it's generated form. Because it's generating form, it's able to consolidate and cook the qi to actually create the action that we require. Within Chan Buddhism, the turning of the yin-yang symbols creates something called the Dharma wheel, but not the Dharma wheel of the teachings, but rather the Dharma wheel of the turning of the Du and the Ren channel. Sometimes this is called the Fa Lun wheel, or the wheel of truth, or the wheel of teachings. And this is another name for the microcosmic orbit. So we have, once again, sort of mix of Taoist and Buddhist symbology. Often when you have these kind of teachings contained within a chart, you'll often see that there's hidden meanings as well, and the Nei Jing Tu has plenty of these. So another reason for 4 is because when the dantian starts to move and separate, one of the inner door teachings that wasn't shared publicly, but is now, is that the dantian was locked into the lower body at 4 points, and those 4 points would need severing. Those points were the perineum, okay, need to be separated from the energetic connection at the base of the body. It was from Qi Hai, it was from Ming Men, and it was from a point that sat underneath the diaphragm that roughly corresponds to the base of the Zhongwan. the central granary. So when these 4 points had enough freedom from the dantian, then the dantian could actually draw that qi further up the body. So there was lots of teachings within our chemical writings of how to actually liberate the influence of the dantian from these 4 points. But that's quite a high level alchemical teaching that they've hidden within the chart. To the left of these 4 yin-yang symbols, we have a farmer with a bull. Yeah, so once again, someone is working, he's toiling within the fields. A bull or an ox, I do apologize, it's an ox. So the ox, I forget that if you go to China and you go to the farm, you see ox all over the place, which is always quite strange to me because you don't really see them in the area where I grew up, but oxen all over the place there. So the ox is pulling a plow, which represents the cultivation of that area, the amount of work, the amount of effort that has to go into the development of the dantian. If we look at the 3 regions of the body very quickly before I carry on further up, you'll see that the work at the base of the body is represented by the farmer with the ox. Now, if you think about what that implies, like hard, grueling work, a lot of physical practice, a lot of time spent developing that area. By the time we get to the middle region of the body, the region of the chest, actually it's not a farmer anymore. It's a boy stood upon a star constellation. We'll explore that a little bit later. So it implies that work at that level has a little bit more to do with the spirit. So it's not grinding, grueling farm work anymore. It's more to do with what you do with your mind. By the time we get to the upper region, to the head, now we have Lao Tzu himself sat there. So this implies a conversion of the type of work that we need to do. So back at the base of the body, if we return there where the farmer is working the soil, see, it kind of implies that a lot of the grueling body work and energy work is done in the early stages to fire up the body, to get the dantian going. This is the active part of the alchemical process, and after this, a lot of it is based on consciousness work or letting go or sitting back. So lots of meaning contained here in the lower part of the chart. Yeah. So the water rises from the lowest temple near the entrance into the tailbone, and it rises up through the lumbar region of the spine, which is on the right. And you can see this is why the waterway is the thickest at the bottom. See, it's climbing up through the rocks that are shown in blue on this chart, right? And you see it's nice and thick. That's the lumbar bones. And as it gets up towards the middle region, it passes through another fire. It's like the waterway itself is on fire. You see these nice red flames here, just above the height of the lower region? This is the Ming fire. So the Ming fire is an expansion of warmth that sits around the back, said to sit between the kidneys. Or originally they used to attribute it to one of the kidneys, but now they agree it's between the kidneys. Essentially, it's a glowing ball of warmth that sits at the top of the lumbar region. The idea was that the qi needed to be warmed here so that it continued to serve as a catalyst to move the qi up through the spine, up towards the higher regions of the body. So this represents the fire that sits around the back of the kidneys. It's called the Ming fire because your Ming represents your life and your health and your destiny, your fate, all of these kind of ideas put together. And the idea was that if the Ming fire could be mastered in the right way, it wasn't too hot, but it definitely hadn't gone out. It was enough to warm the qi, and this would improve your health and your path through life and lead to longevity. So it was a very important part of the body. There's whole teachings within alchemy on how to establish a nice healthy Ming fire to ensure that the qi moves through the spine healthily. Yeah. So to the left of the fire, we have a lady sat weaving. She's spinning and weaving silk. This is the weaving girl. So here we have symbology representing different organs that assist in the alchemical process. She represents the energies of the kidneys. Yeah, so she's next to the Ming fire for a reason, because that's said to reside by the kidneys. So she's weaving, and her weaving rises towards heaven, and you can see this sort of red line that's sort of snaking out of her hands and going up the spine as well. So this is representing the movement and the importance, the necessity of the kidney energy. So she's weaving, which once again represents a cycle. So we have to understand the cycles of kidneys, the cycles of our health, the cycles of our life. How do we understand the conversion of Jing within the body, the essence that comes from the kidneys? And if we can understand this and master it, then her weaving will assist in the rising of the qi up through the spine. You can see that the weaving comes out of her hands, and instead of going straight up, it moves across towards the Ming fire before it rises up through the spine. This is because the weaving cycles of the kidneys require the Ming fire's cooking, the steaming of it, to help that rise up through the body. So basically you have a yin and a yang component. She represents yin, which is all about steadying, which is why it's a woman, essentially. They're trying to represent a yin and the feminine quality here. So she represents the ability to understand the cycles of the kidneys and regulate them so they work for you. So you're not damaging your health. You're learning to preserve the essence, preserve the kidneys. And the yang aspect of the kidneys is the Ming fire, which is helping to serve as a catalyst for the weaving that comes out of her to move the kidney chi up through the spine. Very cleverly shown here, I think. She sat on a cliff face that stretches out towards the left that looks a little bit precarious. It looks like it might fall off, but she sat on it there quite solidly. This represents the diaphragm. So the diaphragm was seen as a very thick and strong region of the body that separated the lower and upper abdominal regions. And we put it on the chart here. It's shown not only as a marker between the two sections of the body, but also because it was understood that the diaphragm had to be loosened, it had to be mastered, it had to be able to move properly in order for the chi to interchange between the lower and upper regions of the body. Some scholars might disagree and say the diaphragm is only there to show the difference between the lower and upper parts of the abdomen. But I think it's there for a reason. That's always been my opinion, because simply for the sake of, you'll always see the diaphragm represented on alchemical charts. It doesn't matter if it's necessary or not, they will find a way to put the diaphragm in. So there's a reason they keep indicating the importance of the diaphragm. To the left of the lady weaving girl, is a forest. And you see there's a load of trees with hanging down leaves. The idea is there's supposed to be, it's not so clear on this chart, but there's supposed to be a breeze running through the trees. So the trees are blowing around in the wind. This is the wood element, and if you know anything about Chinese medicine, this represents the energy of the liver. And the idea is that the wind passing through the liver is the liver qi. The qi is the wind that is passing through. So they're indicating that along with the cycle of the kidney energy represented by the weaving girl, we also need a smooth flow of qi from the kidneys to ensure that everything takes place as it needs to within the body. If the liver qi is stagnant, the liver is not functioning properly, then the qi will become stuck. The trees are no longer blowing in the wind, and nothing can convert within the body. So the liver is always shown here within alchemical charts as well for that reason. Sometimes the liver is represented by a dragon, but in this case they've represented it with a forest, which is kind of nice. The weaving girl sat there just outside of the tree line. The trees are rooted into the diaphragm. Okay, they're growing out of the cliff. Now that doesn't mean the liver is growing out of your diaphragm, but the two are related to each other very, very closely. Because if the liver qi is stuck, if there's no breeze passing through the trees, then the diaphragm becomes tight as well. And that's why the diaphragm gets stuck when people are stressed, when people are tense, because the liver qi is not moving properly. So you have these kind of sort of Chinese medicine 101 symbols kind of shown here within the chart. So going up a little bit, we have this boy stood in the constellation. It's quite a change. I always think that as you move up the chart, things start to get a little bit more esoteric. And by the time we get here to this boy stood in the stars, then things start to get quite mystical. So he stood on a spiral constellation, and he's got a string of stars coming out of him that represents the Big Dipper. And when we go into the esoteric symbology a little bit further in the chart, a little bit further on, we'll see that there's a very specific meaning for why he's holding the Big Dipper, why he's controlling these points, these stars. But this is the boyfriend, the lover of the woman who's weaving underneath. And he represents the energy of the heart. He is the energy of yang. That's the heart that he's sitting in. So the heart is representing as something that has a spiral energy, a cycle within it. It's also linked to the cosmos, to the heavens, for the stars. And this is because the mind is said to reside within within the heart. I do apologize, within the region of the heart. So surrounding him is some symbology that could be water, could be fire. It's kind of a mix of the two, and this is very, very deliberately done. And because if you look at the symbol of his girlfriend, the weaving girl, and you look at him, the boy who represents the heart, he's actually called the cowherd boy, and we'll explain why a little bit later. These two, their interreactions with each other, represent the mingling of fire and water energy. They're very deliberately placed with their backs towards one another. So if you were to lift her straight up, you'd see they're back to back. They're not really communicating. So in the chart, the fire and the water energy are not mixing. But if you look at where that energy travels from where he stood, it moves up and it moves to the base of this temple with lots of towers, and her weaving energy goes up towards there as well. So basically the fire and water energy needs to mix as it rises up through the spine. Now her energy, the energy of the kidneys, the water will rise up via the toil represented by the farmer and by the cycling of the wheel that she contains, the weaving wheel, whereas his energy rises if we learn to master the realm of heaven rather than earth. So basically this is to do with mental qualities and stilling the mind, stilling the emotional qualities. And these things, again, are talked about within the chart when we go deeper into it. This is just a brief once-over of everything that is shown in the chart, and we'll go through each of these in much greater detail, because there's a lot contained within this chart. Sometimes you'll see people say that he's standing upon the tongue rather than the heart. It's kind of true, because the tongue and the heart are connected within Chinese medicine, because they both correspond to the element of fire within the body. But okay, so they draw it as a tongue, perhaps with a saliva on it, but okay, it might be showing that there's substances to swallow and things when we go deeper, but primarily it's worth remembering this is the heart. It very deliberately sits within the center of the chest cavity. If you look at the placement according to the artist, it's not to the left, it's not to the right, it's not up, it's smack bang in the middle of that cavity, because it's the prime organ that resides within the chest. This is where the fire energy needs to be governed. Continuing up the spine now, past cowherd boy and weaving girl, we go past more temples that reside within the spine, and these are again more clipping passes, more points where it sticks. It's hard to ascertain exactly what height that would be, that particular point, but it probably corresponds to Shen Dao, the sort of point between the shoulder blades, I would say, at that particular point, which is a very common sticking point within alchemical practices. Loads of people get their qi stuck there, so you normally need a little bit of help from somebody or a bit of body work to get the qi a little bit past that point. Then we go further up. We get to a pagoda. This is the 12-tiered pagoda, or 12-tiered temple that represents the throat, the trachea, and the sort of sticking points within the neck. Now I know within the cervical vertebra there's normally 7, that's true, but they talk about the 12-tiered pagoda representing the regions of the throat that the qi must pass through. Now within this chart they don't specifically go into it, they just talk about the 12-tiered pagoda being the throat, but actually there are certain teachings that say that there are 12 stages of development of one of the wheels, one of the lun, essentially corresponding with the chakra that resides of the region of the throat. So even though that understanding of the lun, the wheel, is not really required for the microcosmic orbit process it is talking about here, and there's no further instruction within the chart, there's definitely a little bit of an allusion to this idea that by choosing the 12 tiers of the pagoda as we pass through this area. It's a major clipping pass for the qi. So unlike the other clipping passes like Shen Dao that has a little temple with the water passing through, this is a major temple that's depicted on the chart, because there's a lot of work that needs doing with the neck, also with the cervical vertebrae themselves, to enable the qi to pass up through to that region of the spine. Just sort of up a little bit from that a little bit, and to the left you've got a bridge over a square pool of water, which is quite nicely depicted in this color version of the chart. Because if you ever see the black and white version, or the carving on the wall of the White Cloud Temple, it's quite hard to see what that is. So you ever go to White Cloud Temple in Beijing, if you look at that pool with a bridge over it, it's quite funny. It looks more like a trapdoor that's opening, with a rainbow coming out of it. I remember the first time I saw it, I thought, why is there a trapdoor? And then only when I saw a color version, I realized it was a bridge over a river, and then all of a sudden it made sense. But I've seen actually in some writings online, and I've seen one book I can think of where they also thought it was a trapdoor that's opening, but it's just because the diagram's not that clear. It's a bridge over some water there. This represents the Magpie Bridge. So the Magpie Bridge was actually the bridge through which the two star-crossed lovers within the chest cavity of the body actually visited each other. And this is to do with a myth that once per year a bridge of magpies would appear with which these lovers could pass across in order to see each other. And this kind of corresponds to one of the sort of Chinese version of Valentine's Day, if you like. It's meant to be when the Magpie Bridge is open. So it's just from sort of Chinese mythology. But they use this bridge to represent the touching of the tongue to the point of connection between the Du and the Ren, which is on the roof of the mouth. So just behind the teeth, if you say the word tut, where your tongue finishes, this isn't the Magpie Bridge. People think it is. But this is actually a safety point that drops excess qi down from the head. So most Qigong, your tongue should be there for a long time. Once the fire and water energy mix properly and the cycle is actually taking place strongly within the body, then it's actually the highest point of the mouth that the tongue should move to. So this is kind of intermediate level study. And this is the Magpie Bridge that is shown here on this chart. So the idea is if your tongue connects here, then the yin and yang energies can cycle effectively within the body, but you'll know when that point is open, because when you touch your tongue to it, it's like a slight electrical current that exists at that point, and that's said to be the bridge that is formed over the pool of water on the top of the mouth. They have a little pool leaking and like some water spraying into the chart you can see here as well, which is quite nice. It's one of the only times they actually mention a potential error on the chart. They talk about qi leakage being an error. And the reason they focused on this one so considerably is because it's a major blockage. If you get to that stage of the body where they're doing the run open and you don't understand how to utilize the Magpie Bridge, then the qi will leak, as they say. So what this means is when you start drawing the Jing up through the body and it converts into qi, if the Magpie Bridge is not formed, there's no way for this to convert back into the substance that is consumed back through the body to continue the cycle. The reason this is, well, I use the word dangerous, but maybe a little risky rather than dangerous, is because if you keep converting the essence and the bridge is not formed, then you're just burning up because it's not converting back down through the body. So the cycle is broken. So all you create is a very yang active part of the process rather than a healthy conversion within the body that will lead to longevity. So they indicate this very clearly upon the chart. Coming out of the pool of water, you see a rainbow. You've got these 5 branches coming out, and then there's another section of the rainbow coming from above at the highest point of the chart. So these 2 rainbows coming together actually represent the Du and the Ren, the governor and the Ren channel. So that's a bit unusual because obviously they are both shown within the head, and it's kind of leaving the sort of literalness of the chart now, because really the Ren channel would be coming from the base of the body near the perineum and rising up, and the Du would be on the back. So they've kind of taken some liberties with sort of location of these charts, but this is what they represent. Sometimes if you see modern depictions of the Nei Jing Tu, they've actually moved those rainbows, which I think is a bit cheeky, really. Shouldn't we take that liberty? But sometimes you'll see the Du and the Ren actually depicted around this diagram rather than in the head. But the reason they show it up here is because ultimately the Du and the Ren will fully open when the Magpie Bridge is formed, and there's enough cultivation on the level of spirit. It's depicted as a rainbow for 2 reasons. One is there are 5 stages of development of the Du and the Ren. So the microcosmic orbit has to go through 5 stages of conversion, with the most basic being a movement of qi, and then yang qi ultimately. Then from there, there's the Jing cycle that's shown within the chart, and then there's further developments of the Du and the Ren that come after this. It's also because they say if the Du and the Ren opens, then you will master the 5 elements, which is represented by the 5 branches of the rainbow. Ultimately, it means that the 5 elemental energies within the body will harmonize, and then pure yin and yang will arise within your consciousness. So this is kind of high-level alchemical teachings. Yin and yang arising within your consciousness are represented by the yellow and the red sphere that are depicted here, kind of level with where the eyes would be. This is your head, right? So one of them represents the sun, this is the yellow sphere, and the other one represents the moon, which is actually the red sphere. It's not what you would expect. But it doesn't matter which one is which, but ultimately this is yin and yang represented by the sun and the moon arising within the sort of realm of consciousness. Sometimes people have misunderstood, actually. There's a classic that was, I'd say classic, maybe, written from the 1940s or 50s. It's not an old classic, but it's kind of a text everybody who's ever studied alchemy will have come across at some stage if they really look at the literature. And it comes from that early time when people were trying to understand the Chinese teachings. And they actually misunderstood from this chart because they thought yin and yang were based in the eyes. So there's all sorts of exercise with rotate your eyes 26 times this way, rotate your eyes so many times the other way and stuff, and yin and yang will combine. It's not true. Yeah, yin and yang were not found within the eyes. It is just that they represented them as the eyes within the chart. It's the solar and lunar energies that develop within the body when the 5 elements start to converge. It's nothing to do with rolling your eyeballs, because that won't do anything. In the center of the head, we then have 2 characters. We have Buddha reaching up, or what they call Biyahu, the blue-eyed barbarian, I suppose is a literal translation of it, but it's kind of a non-PC way of saying he's a foreigner. He wasn't Chinese. So we have an Indian monk represented here, and he's reaching up towards heaven. And then above him is Lao Tzu, who's obviously to the Taoists fairly important. And he's sitting up in heaven, and they say his eyebrows are hanging down towards earth. In this particular version of the chart, the eyebrows aren't actually depicted, but classically on the stone carving, has very long eyebrows are reaching down, almost reaching down towards Buddha. So these 2 characters, well, first of all, they represent the coming together of Buddhism and Taoism, but there's also a couple of other meanings here. First of all, there's a political connotation, because politics gets into anything. Now you see Lao Tzu, who's Chinese, he's at the highest level. He's at the highest levels of the peak. Poor old Buddha, who's a foreigner, he's not quite there. He's still reaching up towards Lao Tzu because he's not Chinese. So there was that kind of connotation. We'll accept some Buddhism into the teachings, but we don't want to accept that it's as good as Taoism because, everybody was biased. The other reason is because ultimately saying that Buddhist teachings, and this is a little more PC, Buddhist teachings represent the understanding of the mind, the understanding of consciousness. So he is reaching up towards the heavens, showing that Buddhist teachings are about the mind and about the spirit, about consciousness, the realm of heaven. Lao Tzu's eyebrows are hanging down to earth because the Taoist teachings are about mastering the level of form and mastering the level of earth, which is the body. So when his eyebrows are reaching down, they're showing that you use the form of the body to move towards enlightenment. So these 2 paths coming together are represented by the directions that they're aiming towards, heaven and earth. A little bit of a nicer reading rather than the political reading for why these 2 characters are placed as they are. Further up on the head, you can see that the water that's moving up through the spine now actually reaches another lake at the top. You've got these sort of waves. And this represents the brain marrow and the ocean, if you like, of essence that develops within the brain. And this is very, very important because this is known as the upper valley. And if you see within the head, you have these peaks on the left and this large peak on the right. And it's supposed to be like a valley of these sort of karst mountain peaks that the water is running through. And this water, like say, is the marrow of the brain, the ocean of the brain. So when the essence reaches that point, when it reaches the top of the brain, then something very, very important starts to happen, which is the production of the alchemical fluids that convert the function of the body. Rising through this ocean of the brain is a red winding path you can see here, and this is the yang that's being extracted from the brain. So on the base of the body, we're extracting the Jinghua from the ocean of the essence. On the top of the body, the seed of yang is being extracted from within the ocean of the marrow. And this corresponds with the sort of marrow washing teachings, the sort of highest levels of conversion of the essence substances within the body. There are 9 mountain peaks at the top. These represent the 9 regions of the head, or the 9 regions of the upper dantian. And this is alluding to various consciousness-based teachings that take place within alchemical writing. So the 9-peaked mountain is another alchemical name for the head, for the top of the head, the highest peak of conversion. So this water is reaching right up to that point. We have a small box-like object, which is the spiritual net, that which encapsulates and captures the yang essence that is extracted from the brain. And it's from here that this spirit is then refined and converted back down through the body. So we'll explore that a little bit later when we look at the writings around there. But just to note that that's there at the moment, this little sort of it looks like a little sort of pyramid with a capstone missing, but actually is supposed to represent an enmeshed temple that sits there. But we'll look at that a bit later. On the central peak of the head is a small grain, a small sphere, which is actually missing from many versions of the chart. It's almost like they forgot to put it on, or maybe deliberate, because ultimately that shows the highest alchemical teaching. And this is, they say, the entire universe contained within a single piece of grain. And as I say, we'll explore these ideas and look at them as we go through the chart in greater detail. But this is a general overview of the chart. This is what is depicted. This is how it shows the body. And this is how it's trying to explain how each of these regions of the body needs converting. And many of these teachings are contained within the poetry that is attached to the chart.